I believe that storytelling has the power to transform our lives in the most fascinating and unexpected ways. Over my career as a journalist and social entrepreneur, I met individuals whose passion and values are making this world a better place. I am Elizabeth Filipouli, and I invite you to hear the stories of some amazing, inspirational people. So I would like to start from a few years ago, perhaps, I don't know, a few decades ago, when you were a little child, Femi. How did it all begin? What was the environment that you were growing up in?
Well, I was the daughter of Nigerian immigrants, and I have an immigrant story that every immigrant will know because from a very young age, you are the communicator for your parents. You're the translator. You're the person who explains what is going on in a culture that is very different for them. So I know my friends whose parents came from many different parts of the world. We all have very similar experiences growing up. And I think that all played into what I ended up being, which was a communicator, because you as a little kid, you are the communicator to your parents. So my parents came from Nigeria in the 1960s and they studied in the United Kingdom. My mother became a university college lecturer. My father studied for the bar and he was a lawyer. And as a little kid, I was extremely gregarious, very eloquent, fearless. I would walk up to people and tell them, hello, my name is Femi. Who are you? What are you doing? I would wave at people in shop windows as I was walking by. So as you can see, I'm a very different person now, but I actually see as a youngster, as a little kid, I can see the person that I have grown into because I already had that. I already would love to talk to people. I talk to strangers on the buses and on the trains going around London. I'd ask people about what they were doing. And I also had a news show when I was a little kid. And you're wondering, how is this possible? Well, what would happen is my mother every Friday would take myself and my sister swimming. So Friday night was swimming night. And at the end of swimming night, she'd come back and we'd have rice and hot pepper stew and chicken and peas. And we'd have that and we'd sit around the dinner table and I'd ask everybody for their news, their family news. And I would be the news at 10, which is a very famous newscast. And you'd have Big Ben, the clock that would do the bongs. We call it the bongs. And it would go bong, bong, bong. And then after 10 bongs, it would be the news at 10. So I would be the news at 10 because it's quite late by the time we got back from our swimming trip. And I would just do all of the family news as a newscaster. So when I was 7, I was doing the family news. So all the rest was bound to happen. I knew as a little kid exactly what I was going to be.
When was the first time that you visited Nigeria?
The first time I visited Nigeria, I was 4 years old. And I remember it vividly, but weird things that only a 4-year-old would remember. So I remembered that there were so many black and brown people. I grew up in London, and it's a pretty diverse place, but everywhere I went in Lagos and in Baden, there were black people. I was like, what is going on here? I'm not a minority. And I didn't have those words. But what I did notice was that when I went to the store, all of the food had people who were black on them. They didn't have white people on the food. All the adverts, they were all black people. The billboards, they were all black people. I was like, whoa, what is going on here? And I think as a little kid, you get used to being special. You get used to standing out. And I would always stand out in the UK. And I grew up in Kent, which is called the Garden of England. And at the time in the late 60s, there really weren't any black people there. It was very white. And so people would look at me and they'd touch my hair and they stroke my hair and I'd be their friend because they'd only have one little brown friend. So I went from that experience of being somebody's pet, which is basically what it was, to nobody even looking at me because there were millions of little black girls in Lagos. So I was really shocked. And it's only now as an adult I can process what was going on, which is the feeling when you no longer have to stand out as a minority. What is that feeling when you can be the same as everybody else? People aren't standing up and asking you to fill out a form because they want, people of color or BAME people on their books. They're not asking you to do stuff specially. They're not asking you to speak for Black History Month. They're not asking you to do these special things because everybody's Black. And that feeling I had as a 4-year-old, but I couldn't put words to it. But I remember that vividly. And now every time I'm on the African continent, there is a moment where I get off the plane and my shoulders go, I navigate the world like this, metaphorically. And then when I get off the plane and I'm anywhere on the African continent, I just go, and I exhale, because I no longer have to be a role model. Well, actually, that never leaves you. But I no longer have to be somebody who is representing an ethnic group. That's a lot of work. So I spend my whole time just wandering around the world like this until I get to the African continent. And then I'm actually anywhere where there are Black and brown people. I have a very similar feeling when I'm in Haiti or when I'm in Jamaica or anywhere where I'm not having to represent and I can just be me. And that's a lot for a 4-year-old to process. I didn't process that as a 4-year-old. I was just shocked that everywhere, on everything, on the TV, on the radio, on products in the grocery store, on billboards, there were Black people, and I wasn't a minority. That was the first time I went to Nigeria.
As a minority, 4-year-old in the UK, did you ever feel marginalized? Did you feel special? Was the circle of people that you were or your parents were socializing with mixed race? How was it?
I think as a youngster, you become aware of your skin tone and the different way people treat you because they do it. And there's no reason for kids to feel like they're some other kind of group or a minority or something special or different because of their skin tone. It's only adults who treat them like that, or kids who've listened to the adults who treat them like that. So I remember when I was a very little kid, I'd go to the doctors and I had a very strong London accent. If you think this is strong, you should have heard me when I was a little kid. Very strong London accent. And the doctor would say, "Where are you from?" And I'd say, "Clapham." And the doctor would say, "Where are you really from?" And I'd be very confused. He's asking a 7-year-old, "Where are you really from?" I'll be like, "I know, I'm really from Clapham." That's incredibly racist, even if you don't know it's being racist. Why are you saying to a little Black British girl, "Where are you really from?" That's the next stage is go back to where you come from, which again was something that I heard as a little kid. And it's really painful because I've got little nephews who are now the same age that I was when I was hearing, "Where were you really from? Can I touch your hair? Go back to where you came from." The N-word. I mean, the 1960s and 1970s was not very PC. So I'd hear all kinds of things. Mostly people wanted to pet me, which is another kind of othering, right? Because you don't go up to a white little person and stroke their hair. "Why are you touching my hair?" I have a thing, my friends will laugh if they hear this. I have a thing about people touching my hair. So when they even come close, I do this. I can kind of anticipate. Get off of my hair. It's rude. It's sexual. It's, ugh. And I think now as an international community, we're getting a better idea of how we treat each other. It's taking a long time, but we're getting a better idea of how we treat each other. But it's a lesson that you have to learn all of the time. And if you are a minority growing up in a society where people see you as a different group, you learn the ability to, how do I communicate this? So now I will sit down and talk to people about why they shouldn't touch my hair. Whereas 20 years ago, I would just be very upset and slap them, which I think is a perfectly reasonable thing to do. But now I will sit down and tell them why they can't touch my hair. Oh, but it looks so pretty, they say. And I say, thank you, but you can't put your hands in my hair. And not even ask, or can I touch your hair as they're touching my hair? So that is masterclass. Do not touch people's hair.
I couldn't agree more. I find it very rude and very non-sensitive. I mean, I would be very annoyed, you know, if people came over to touch my hair or my skin or whatever. I mean, and I am always, you know, very respectful. And I think it's regardless of race, ethnicity, age. I mean, not even, you know, a little kid. Because as you're saying, it's annoying. I remember people approaching me, even to stroke me, even, you know, to touch my face, whatever. But it's not nice. And I think that people need to become more respectful and more sensitive towards others. So little Femi is growing up and she's doing her Friday 10 o'clock news. So who are the role models and why do you think that you were doing it? Is it because, of course, I assume you were attracting the attention, so everyone was there in the family and waiting for little Femi to do the 10 o'clock news on Fridays. But at the same time, was there anything in specific that attracted you to that?
I genuinely think that I have a vocation because I had no role models. There were so few Black and brown people on TV, I can count them on one hand. My parents had no connection with the media. And I always tell people this so that they are encouraged, because my parents were Nigerian immigrants. They had no connection with the media. Nigerian families love engineers and doctors, okay, and lawyers. These are professions they know about. A journalist, what is that? They have no idea what a journalist is. So that was not on their list of professions that they would like me to do. So they had no connections, no way into the media business. I knew nobody. I just was a natural communicator. So, and I love the radio. I listened to the radio all the time. The radio was my comfort. The radio was my friend. I had radios all over the house. So when I was 14, there was a radio station, which still exists now, called LBC. It was I believe, one of the first talk stations in the country, in the United Kingdom, if not the first talk stations in the United Kingdom. At the weekend, they had a children's show. And I would dial in. This is how long ago it was. I would literally put my finger into the phone, and speed dial meant that I knew the number of the station and I would dial very quickly. So I would speed dial so that I could be the first person on the kids' quiz, the first person to talk on the radio for that 1 hour. And I would usually be the first or the second because I would be dialing during the news. So I'd get a head start and I would chat on the radio. Tommy Boyd would be doing the radio show. So Tommy Boyd is a veteran broadcaster in the UK. And I chat to him and we talk on the radio, do the quiz. And then what I would eventually ended up doing was doing little radio reports for LBC at the weekend. So I'd go off and do reporting, and my reporting would be on the air, come back in and talk about it. So I was 14 when I was on the radio in London. So my school friends would hear me like, we heard you on the radio. And I'm like, yay. And it was just fun. And I was very comfortable talking to people. So I would write to people. Again, this was before the internet in the UK. We didn't have email as early as I know my colleagues had email in the US. They were using email much more often than certainly in the UK we had it. So I would physically write to well-known people, ask them if I could interview them. Many of them said yes, and I'd go off and I'd do little interviews with them, write them up, put them in newsletters. So I was doing journalism at a very young age. Journalism. I think it was probably terrible, but I was having the time of my life, and people were very open, very accessible. So I worked in London on LBC, which is a big radio station when I was a kid, and I studied at Birmingham University in the UK. At Birmingham University, Birmingham had a couple of really big radio stations. So as a university student, I would go along to the local commercial radio station, which was BRMB, which was a music station. And I would stack, again, aging me, I would stack the records because they were actual records. and they would teach me to edit and drive the radio desk like a barter. So I would go in and do work, which was boring work, which was stacking the records, reclaiming tape. And again, I am talking real tape. So in between actual tape, you'd always have a little bit of yellow or red tape, which told you when the next news story was happening or the next piece of music. And I would reclaim the tape, which is take out that, do a nice little edit on the tape so the tape would continue smoothly. This was a terrible job, but this is a good job to give to a student. So I would do all of that stuff, and then they would teach me. I remember one of the team at the radio station teaching me how to put carts in, again, cartridges, going back to 1980s radio, how to drive a desk with the faders. All of the things I learned because I so in love with radio. And at the weekends when I wasn't doing my studying, I wasn't also doing my studying during the week, but that's another story. But the weekends when I wasn't doing my studying, I would go into the commercial radio station at my local university, by my local university, and I would work on the country and Western music show. And I would be putting away the records and getting out the records. So the host would have this list of records, and I would get them out. And there was one person that jumped out at me, Charlie Pride. I was like, whoa, there's a Black country singer. That's amazing. So I know way too much about country music because I worked on a country and Western, it was back then, radio show behind the scenes, pulling out the records, putting the records back in. But this was even before we had things like people like interns or work experience. I kind of was doing it myself. How do I get to work in radio? How do I get to work in media? And I would write letters and ask and invite myself into radio stations. And everybody amazingly said yes. They actually said yes. And I think this was before you had the, what intern are we going to have this month? And who's going to be the fellow? And it was before all of that happened. Now it's more formalized, and we have a lot of work experience. It was in the UK, or a lot of interns we have in the US, for instance. And now it's a system. It's a known way of how do we give young people experience, get a little glimpse into a career. I created my own system just by bugging people, sending them letters, asking them if I could come in. And I don't think they had the heart to say no. So I worked in some amazing places. So I worked in the commercial radio station right by my university. I also worked at the BBC radio station, and I'd go in and answer the phones during phone-ins. And I would do all of that work while I was studying for my degree. So by the time I had finished my degree, I already had connections and work and job offers at the commercial radio station and the BBC radio station. And the day after I graduated at Birmingham University, I went to work for the BBC at a BBC centre that doesn't exist anymore, but very famous, called BBC Pebble Mill. And that is where I started as a freelance and then became full-time at the BBC. So I'm not sure I had planned it out like that, but I knew if I wanted to be in the media, you have to work in the media. And how do you get that experience? You have to be there, be close, and get people to teach you. And that's how I learned.
What was your first role with BBC? I see the BBC identity here, which is lovely, and I love the photo, and that's from 1992, yes? Mm-hmm. Was it the first year that you had joined the BBC, and how long did you stay with them? How did you, advance, of course, the first steps in your media career, but what was it that, took you to the next stage?
I've had so many jobs that I cannot remember half of them. I used to put all of my jobs on my CV, and then there were 40, there were 50, there were 60. And now I can't even remember some of the jobs I had. But while I was at university, I worked at the BBC. So I would come in and help with the phone-ins. I'd come in and do behind the scenes work. So it was a very smooth transition from working part-time to freelancing. And so I worked at local radio, so Radio WM, Radio West Midlands. So my first job was doing reports for the news at Radio WM. And I was a freelancer, and I remembered I got paid £12 if it was an interview, and I got paid £15 if it was a package. So a package is when you have music or you have other elements in, just to make it more of a feature. So I would put music in every interview. So I would get paid £3 more because then that way I was earning more. So you can imagine how much work I would have to do in order to pay rent. It was a lot, but it made you really good at coming up with story ideas, turning one story into multiple stories. Anyone who's a freelancer who works in media understands this. So you have the basic raw material. So it might be one story that's going to work really well for my local station, but maybe I can sell that same story and tweak it and sell it to BBC World Service. And maybe if I tweak it a little bit more, put some music in, I can sell it to BBC Radio 1. So one story you can sell maybe 2 or 3 times by writing it, editing it in a different way. And then that way, I may well have earned a whole 50 or 60 pounds, which would be fantastic. So I got really good at imagining how many different ways can this story exist. So as somebody who has to pitch stories, to come up with ideas, and also just being really creative about being a freelance. Every freelance will understand, how do you turn this one idea into multiple ideas? How do you sell this one idea to multiple people so that you can eat? And that was great. I was doing that when I was 22, 23. And every week I'm thinking, I need to work harder. I've got to work harder. I have to make more contacts. And it was fun. It was really fun. I don't think I ever felt I was never going to pay the rent, but it just meant that I worked really hard. And in my 20s, I worked every single day for probably 10 years. And again, anyone who is a freelancer or has been a freelance understands that need to never turn down work, because you're not sure where the next job is coming from. And you never turn down work because you're young and you're just starting in the business and you want to be able to say yes to everybody. And it took me a very long time, and I'm still learning now, to be able to say no sometimes, because I started as a freelancer, and a freelancer makes 24 hours into 25. Right? How do you squeeze that extra little bit of work into just 24 hours? So I did that for a long time, but wow, I'm so glad I did it in my 20s, because I didn't sleep. I worked all the time, hardly ever went on holiday, but I created this amazing body of work and experience in every job I learned from. And people were so willing to teach me and to train me. So to go back to that BBC ID, that was well into when I'd already been working many years at the BBC. So I'd already started at local radio. I'd been part of the original launch team for BBC Radio 5. And I was doing all sorts of extra jobs, as well as doing my job as a researcher at Radio 5. I was doing extra jobs. So that was probably one of the extra jobs that I was doing on top of everything else. And my first TV job was as a cultural reporter on a syndicated art show called First Night. So I did that in the West Midlands. And then my second TV job was Top of the Pops, which is a legendary TV show. In the early days of Top of the Pops, and how Top of the Pops grew, it was DJs, famous people and celebrities. And what happened in the early 90s was all of these people got quite old and we loved them and they were iconic, but they were quite old. And so the team at Top of the Pops thought, the music on Top of the Pops is for young people. So we need some young people to actually come and present the show. So I noticed this change to Top of the Pops. So I wrote to the executive producer of Top of the Pops and I said, dear Stan Appel, who was the executive producer at the time, famous executive producer at the BBC. And I wrote to him at Pinewood Studios and I said, I can see that you're using younger people. I'm a young person and I would really like to present Top of the Pops. And I sent him a VHS of this art show that I was hosting. I was enthusiastic when I was younger. I wasn't particularly skilled. Bubbly was a good description for me. I sent him my VHS tape. He wrote back and said, please come and do an audition. So I did an audition for Top of the Pops. It wasn't that great because I was terrified, but I then got the job and I presented Top of the Pops because I asked to present Top of the Pops. I still ask to do jobs I really want to do. If there's a job you want to do, you're not going to write letters anymore, but you can email, right? You've got a list of things you want to do, a list of things you want to achieve. Make that list. I have one on my laptop and I just check it from time to time. And then what do you need to do to get to that person, to ask that person? There is a thin line between being extremely annoying and irritating and maybe a stalker, and a line between being a go-getter and ambitious. So you have to have that sensitivity gene. You can't be just chasing people because that is annoying. So you need to have that self-awareness about what is thinking ahead and planning your future and what is being crazy, okay? Know that line. Sometimes I maybe have crossed that line, but mostly you have to read people. So I asked if I could present Top of the Pops, and the guy at the top said yes, because I wrote to him.
Top of the Pops, and then Science in Action. And we have this picture of you inside the pool and with this tray with different things, which you balance very skillfully. And of course, metaphorically speaking, I'm sure that over the course of your career, you had to balance quite a few things. And we would love to hear about the show, but I would also love to hear about, you know, these sensitive balances and the context and how BBC was also culturally. So were they embracing you? Did you ever feel minority within the BBC? Were there any issues of discrimination?
So let's start with Science in Action. First of all, Science in Action was a BBC education series. It's a very long one. Also part of a series called Cat's Eyes. It is still running on television to this day because science never dates, but everybody, my hairstyle does. So these films that we made in the 90s are still on television. Kids are still watching them. And I believe that episode was about floating, and I had an amazing crew at the BBC, and we thought, how do we make science fun and exciting? And we traveled the world doing science experiments and stories and funny storytelling that wraps science into those stories and those films. And so even to this day, I have kids who watch me and they're a little bit surprised I'm looking a little bit older because I was in my 20s in that picture. But I just did a Skype with some kids in the UK, and they asked me questions about Science in Action. I think they were 10, 11, and we did a Skype a couple of months ago. So that series is still being watched. So that's Science in Action. My awareness about balancing and any kind of isms at the BBC, I just got on with it. I didn't have time for it. My approach was, this is what I want. This is what I'm going to do. And I think I bulldoze people with my enthusiasm. People always say, oh, you sound so enthusiastic. I love radio. I love TV. I have the best time doing my job. So I didn't worry about other people's problems. Something that's happened right now, and we are talking in 2020, in the wake of George Floyd being murdered in the US, and that feeling of Black Lives Matter and social injustice is now around the whole world, including in the UK. I did not have that awareness when I was younger. All I cared about was, what am I going to do next? And I didn't let other people's issues bother me. And one of the things I've learned as we've been really looking at this anti-racist movement, and something that I've been doing at Al Jazeera as well, is that racism is not my problem. It's racist problem. And maybe I had maybe a subconscious awareness of that when I was younger. I didn't walk around saying, oh, everything's so racist. Oh, I'm not getting this job. I'm not getting paid enough. I had no idea how much I was getting paid compared to other people. And again, that's an awareness that is coming now to us much later. Now we're comparing salaries, and now we're getting together as women or as teams and saying, how much are we getting paid? I didn't have that awareness when I was younger. All I had was, this is what I'm going to do, and I am going to do it to the best of my ability. Now, this is not to say that people come to me and try and fill out their forms to make it look like they had more diversity than they did. And that's happened to me several times. And who do we have who's diverse? And everybody would look at me, right? Because I was the only Black person in the room. And even at CNN, I remember they were counting at CNN International, at the CNN International newsroom, they're counting how many people of color they had in the newsroom. And they wanted to write me down as somebody who was either African-American or Black. And I said, no, I'm British or I'm Nigerian. You can't write me down as something that I am not. And they wanted to make their form, their diversity look better than it actually was. And so that's often happened, where people are expecting me to carry all of their diversity on my shoulders. And I think that happens to a lot of people who are Black or brown, come from different minority groups, where you're expected to represent all of the time. And I grew into that role. I don't have a problem with that, because I didn't have anyone for myself to look up to. So when people tell me as a little kid, I watched you doing the weather at CNN, and then I realized that I could be dark-skinned and successful, those messages, those comments, those conversations are very important to me, because I did not knowingly take that on. But that was what happens when you're the only Black or brown person in the room, which was very often when I was in my 20s. That naturally happens. You either do it with grace or you get upset. I chose to do it with grace and with actually humor. That's what keeps me going, is a sense of humor. So I am sure I had instances where I wasn't getting jobs because of my color, that I wasn't getting jobs because of my youth, I wasn't getting jobs because of my gender. But all of those things also worked for me too, because I was the only Black person in the room. Who else are they going to give the job to? So it also can work for you when there is so little diversity out there.
So the role with CNN, the weather role, was a role that catapulted you to fame, right? You became known, you became the face, the international face of weather. And I remember, when I first joined CNN, which was in 2000, was that the year that you started with the weather program?
We launched the World Weather Center at CNN International in 1999. So I remember going to CNN for my audition in April and starting and moving to America in August 1999. And that started a whole new chapter of my career that took me international, which would never have happened if I had not taken on that world weather job. And it was difficult because I was already a reporter, I was already a producer, but I'd taken on a job which was as a weather presenter. And so there is an image for weather presenters, and there's a little box that people like to put you in. And I broke that box. I broke the box. I did reports in the weather. I called people up. I had guests in the weather. I would go to my producer in the newsroom. So I've got a guest. He said, you're doing the weather. How do you have a guest? I booked a guest. There's a hurricane. We have a guest. I was like, how did you book a guest? Like, well, I'm a producer. I know how to book a guest. And they were shocked at what I was doing to the weather. Usually a weather forecast is 2.5 minutes long for the international weather, because there's quite a lot of the world to get around, so 2.5 minutes long. They would use that 2.5 minutes like an ad break, and they would work out what was coming up next and chit chat, and then, okay, sport is coming up next, and they would plan. They would use that 2.5 minutes to plan. They were not used to that 2.5 minutes being active television, where the sound would have to be up. They would have to play videos. I'd have a guest coming in, and it was it was all singing, all dancing weather. And my idea was, if you're doing international weather, the likelihood of you getting your national forecast is like this. how on earth are you going to get your national forecast? So if I'm going to do weather, I want you to be engaged. I want you to have fun. I want you to find it exciting. What can I do to make the weather exciting? And I'm already a reporter anyway. So I brought my reporter and my producer skills to weather, and I don't think they'd ever seen anything quite like it before. And then I said, and now I want to be a correspondent, and now I want to host shows, and now I want to do this and this and this and this and this. And it was campaigning. I campaigned the whole time. And often I would be told no. And I would keep asking until I got a yes.
Femi, is success a destination or is it a journey? And the reason why I'm asking that is because I'm wondering, I mean, I'm hearing you, I'm listening to you, and you know my admiration, about you, your career, who you are as an individual, as a woman. And you have something so natural. So everything, this out of the box thinking, this innovative approach was something that you had from a very young age. So I wonder, was success in your mind as something that you wanted to achieve, or was it something that just arrived in your life, in your career, as you were naturally, in your very charismatic way, you were doing things your own way, the Femi way?
I never think about success as an end goal. I'm always just thinking about what is the next challenge? What is exciting? Done that? Now what shall I do? I've done that. Okay, now what shall I do? And very often I'll be working on a big project on the stream on Al Jazeera. And we took the stream. I've always wanted to do a live version of the stream on stage as a stage production. And it took me years to make that happen. And eventually, January of 2020, we created a stage production of the stream, and it was extraordinary. It was so special. It took me about 3 or 4 years to make this happen. I was doing all of the other jobs that I normally do and working in my spare time, trying to find a stage, a space, how we were going to do it, how technically would we do it, how do we reimagine a TV show as a theatre production, all of that, booking the guests. It took so long and we did it, and it was extraordinary. And I got back and my executive producer said to me, wow, we did it. It worked. The university was so excited. They were so happy. It was like, when are we going to do this again? And then the next day I said to my executive producer, so now what should we do? I'd done that. And now I need to know what's the next thing. And I already had the next thing lined up, because I always want to be working on something exciting, something engaging, something that's different from my normal day. So I don't think of it success as an you've got there. I'm always thinking about what else can I do that is exciting, that's fun, that's different, so that I'm never bored. You'll never hear me say that I'm bored. I'm never bored. I always have projects.
I am like that too. There's always something going on, the next plan, the next idea.
Yeah.
But I think that the people who I met, during my travels, during my career in journalism, attending conferences, so opportunities for networking and getting to know new people, they were inspiring me. They are inspiring me. You are inspiring me. So I wonder if, we have Britain, we have Nigeria, and now we have the US. But that gave you also the opportunity to travel to other places, like the story you did in Guatemala. So how did those travels shape you as a professional and then led you towards the next stage in your career, which I assume is Al Jazeera?
All right, I'll let you into a secret. The first 10 years of my career, so the 20s of my career, the only motivation for me applying for jobs was, one, is this job fun? And two, do I get to travel? I didn't care what the job was. I mean, obviously it had to be TV or radio. I didn't mind if it was presenting or producing or directing. It didn't matter. I did all of those things. So whatever it was, as long as I got to travel, I was really happy. So my first 10 years of really my career, once I started to get paid for it, not talking about the stuff when I was, a teen and doing stuff on the radio, but the first real decade of my career, I just spent traveling around the world, having my best life. I love jumping on planes. This was before 9/11, everybody. So flying was so much fun. I love jumping on planes. I love seeing the world. I love meeting people. Traveling is just an education. So that was really special for me. And that's all I cared about. Like, okay, this job is going to take you to film in Los Angeles. Fantastic. I am applying for that job. This job is going to take you around the world doing children's shows. Fantastic. I'm applying for that job. I I was just one track mind, fun and travel. And then when I hit my 30s, I realized I should probably have a better strategy as somebody in the media. So then I started to pick my jobs. What is the next job? What should I be doing next? And in that period, in my early 30s, was when I applied for CNN and got a job at CNN. And who gets a job at CNN? It is kind of shocking. And I was amazed. And the old set for CNN was you would have the news desk. And I remember when I went for my audition and an interview that took an entire day, I walked past the news desk that I had seen on air. And I was just, this is CNN. That shock and that awe of this incredible news network, that goes away because you can't have that and work for a network. But that moment when I walked by that desk was so special for me. And regardless of where CNN is on its own journey, I will forever be thankful. CNN changed my life and my career. It opened up the world for me. Going to CNN International made my career international. So I had always been asked to host things and present things on stage and moderate and MC. But when I arrived at CNN, I was then asked to host things, to moderate, to MC around the entire world. And that is next level. And there are two things. Of course, I thank CNN for giving me that amazing platform, but also people were asking me because they saw something that they would like to replicate in their event. So I'm not going to be so humble to say it was all CNN, because CNN didn't find me, I found them. But together, those two elements together, me and the international aspect of CNN, and also the vision of CNN, because at that time they hired a lot of young people who were Black or brown. So there was me, there was Tumi Makabo, there's Manita Rajpal, there was Zain Verji, there was Aisha Shasay. This was not an accident. Look at all of these. These are friends of mine, Black, brown, beautiful, talented, smart, accomplished women. CNN International saw what it was and realized that in order to really speak to the world, you needed a team of people who could speak to the world. So I again thank CNN for having that vision. It was one person who actually sadly has passed away. And the vice president of CNN International at the time was Rena Golden, who herself was a woman of color. And so this is why it is important that the gatekeepers are people of color who see what is missing and what needs to be there. So I am forever grateful to Rena Golden, because I didn't do the best audition. My audition was terrible. It was so terrible that they said, go away and we'll do it again at the end of the day. I'm pretty good at interviews. My audition for world weather, I'd never done world weather before. I'd done weather for London, weather for the West Midlands. They gave me the entire map, and I'm trying to think, okay, I have been studying my geography, but standing in front of a global map and doing world weather, that was new to me. I was not, it was not my shining moment, everybody. I did a terrible audition. They asked me back. I did a better one later on in the day, and they gave me the benefit of the doubt. You know, they took a risk and they hired me. They hired me the next day.
So that is CNN. Did you ever come across, I mean, later on you move on to Al Jazeera, and we would love to hear more about Al Jazeera. Did you ever come across any, being negative just for the sake of being negative. And again, nothing to do with racism, because all of us, I think, come across such people, again, regardless of any isms. And how did you handle such cases? Because I think, since of course this masterclass also aims at, aspires to teach younger people, younger professionals, how to handle difficult, complex situations. So how did you handle with people who were not well meant?
Criticisms and setbacks, and people telling you, no, you can't do this, or no, you're not qualified to do this. That happens to me all of the time. And people are surprised because on your resume, they see BBC, CNN, NPR, Al Jazeera, and they think that, oh, well, everything worked out. And I spend a lot of my time turning a no into a yes. I always think when someone tells you, no, you cannot do this, that I just think it's a pause. It's a slight diversion on the way to, yes, you can do it. So I did get a lot, and I do get still people who say no to ideas that I want to do. You have to listen to them and listen to why would they say no, and ask them why, and then work on those reasons why and see if you can plan around them. So often in TV, people will say, no, you can't do this. We don't have the money. So what I started to do, particularly in CNN, when I was at CNN for a decade, so just shy of a decade, my plan was to get out of CNN before I got the 10-year anniversary gift. I did not want to spend my entire career at CNN. There were other things that I wanted to do. And so I would constantly be asking and for pushing for more, and constantly being told, no, you can't do that. No, you're the weather girl. No, you can't do that. You're supposed to be doing weather. You can't do that. You can't do this. You can't do that. And I would work out, well, mostly it was because they didn't have the money, and no was it's easier to say no than it is to say yes. So I would work out the budget first of all. So I'd have the idea, but work out the budget and where the money was coming from. Once you have the budget, that raises a whole load of issues in terms of television, and then you can then do it. So I would always do the budget first and then the pitch, and then put those two together. That helped with a lot of the no's. Also, you wear people down. So I had a manager who, the first manager I had, the second manager I had at CNN was the most extraordinary person. The first manager I had at CNN was really annoyed with me anytime I did anything that didn't involve the weather. So he just said to me one day, "Why are you so ambitious?" Like it was the worst thing. He said ambitious like it was an insult. "Why can't you just do the weather?" And because I would annoy him on a regular basis, I'd say, I've got this idea, let's do this. I've got this idea, let's do this. And he would say, no, 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 all of the time. So the thing to do is to get allies. Who are your allies? And I had a lot of allies who really liked the way that I worked on screen. So I got a lot of support. So I got a lot of support from people who are actually higher up than the person who was telling me no. So build your allies, build your network, build your support system who will then back you up, and they back me up. So I had a sort of success rate, which was after every 10 requests, this is me averaging it out at CNN International, the next one would get a yes, because you can't keep telling somebody who's enthusiastic, working really hard, no, all of the time. So I would just keep asking, and eventually I get a yes. Now, one of my favorite yeses was, I said, I'm going to take the World Weather Department to the Olympics. So I took world weather to the Olympic Games. I think it was 2001, 2002, Park City. And that was the one which was just after 9/11, and everybody was scared, and can we hold an international event? And I did weather live from Park City. I did reporting all through the first week, and some nights I didn't even sleep. I was up writing my reports, up then in the morning doing weather, off doing a weather report. And then the second week, I just hung out at the Olympics with like an all access pass. Had the time of my life. And that was because I wouldn't take no for an answer. So that is one technique, is do not take no for an answer. Work out why the no is happening, and then get some allies and work around it. I'm not saying that you should be arrogant. I'm not saying that you should be rude. I'm saying strategize. And let me give you one more example of some strategy that worked out for me really well. After Hurricane Katrina, CNN International had no money. I mean, they literally threw everything at Hurricane Katrina. They brought reporters and correspondents from all over the world. It was an incredibly expensive endeavor. But just after Hurricane Katrina was when Ellen Johnson Sirleaf was running to be the first female head of state on the African continent. I was presenting Inside Africa at the time, and I said to my producer, we have to go. We have to cover this election. And CNN said, we don't have any money. You can't go. And I said, this is one of the best, good news, extraordinary stories to come out of the continent. We do not do enough of this. We are always doing the negative stories out of the African continent. This is important to me. And they said, sorry, we don't have any money. So I sat down with my producer, Bill Burke, and I said, Bill, how are we going to get the money? And I just found, I don't know how I found it. I found a fellowship. The National Association of Black Journalists and the UNDP, United Nations Development Programme, have put together a fellowship to take journalists of color to Liberia to cover the elections. So I had to get the fellowship. It was like, Bill, there's a fellowship. They're going to fly us to Liberia. We have to get the fellowship. So I spent my entire, I found the fellowship on a Friday. The deadline was a Monday. I spent the entire weekend working on the stories that we were going to present the fellowship with Bill. And Bill was like, no, that's not going to work. Okay, we're going to do this story, this story, this story. Worked on this fellowship, presented it to them on a Monday. Later that week, they said, Femi, you've got the fellowship. We're going to fly you to Liberia. We're going to put you up. I was like, fantastic. So I tell CNN, I've got the money. And they said, well, we're not going to give you a videographer. We're not going to give you a camera person. And I said, but you have to. It's like, I got the fellowship. They're sending me. You don't have to pay for me. You just have to send a camera person. And so I literally begged. So they got the camera person from South Africa and they gave me the videographer, and we filmed for 2 weeks, and we did stand-ups. We covered the election. Stand-ups are when you do your pieces to camera. We did incredible stories and films. We did 2 episodes of Inside Africa. We did amazing work. And that work now is on a list of some of the highlights that CNN quotes for its Africa coverage, its groundbreaking African coverage. That only happened because I wouldn't take no as an answer. Did the fellowship, I got the money, I begged for a videographer. And at the end of that, CNN International took the credit for covering the African continent. So that's how I feel about that. But it's okay because we covered the first female African head of state. We did it. It was an important story. We did it. And we didn't take no for an answer. So strategize. In summary, strategize. Don't take the criticism. Don't take the pushback. Don't take the no's. Strategize and plan. Be smart.
And that takes me so beautifully to my next question, which is about how you became the positive change leader, the social impact leader that you have become. So I was about to ask whether, or how you have used your success, to affect positive impact. But I realized that it is not only your success that you are able, to take advantage of, to maximize your impact, but it is also your passion, your perseverance, your stubbornness, your ambition. So all these different elements and the different boxes that you tick. What is it that made you want to become a social impact leader?
I didn't set out to be a social impact leader. It kind of just happened. A couple of reasons why. One of the reasons it happened was because as a journalist, I cannot take on commercial enterprises. So when I'm moderating or emceeing, I'm only going to do it for education or the 2030 agenda, development agenda, or women's empowerment. I can't go and do a presentation for Walmart, or IKEA once asked me if I would MC their annual meeting. I love IKEA. I would love to do that, but I can't really MC IKEA's meeting because I'm a journalist and I'm a working journalist. So a lot of the things that I can absolutely do have to be things that in some way change the world, so that there is no way that any of my current networks that I work for, that Al Jazeera can ever look at any of the things that I'm doing saying, no, you can't do that. You shouldn't be doing that. So for instance, I've just been doing a couple of events about nutrition and food and ending neglected tropical diseases. There are none of these things that anybody who I work with would be upset about. So I found that the framework within which I can work can only be social justice. It can only be areas where, how do I make the world better? And because I am seen globally, those two things work really well together. And also because the more that you cover the world, the more that you understand and appreciate where the injustices are, why women don't have more power, why kids can't go to school, all of those things that you understand very clearly, that I've done stories about, I've reported about, I've done shows about. Once you understand that, if people ask you, would you help me? Absolutely, I will help them. I'm very happy to do that. So it kind of happened to me because of where I work, how I work. And then once you know, you can't unknow this stuff. So if there's a little bit that you can do to help, very happy to do that. And all I'm doing is using my communication skills, which come very naturally to me. So I get off pretty lightly. But if I can make an event exciting and fun and engaging and passionate, that is something I'm really happy to do, because the content is there. But how do we engage people? And that is something that I feel that I'm able to do really very easily. It comes second nature to me. Somebody once said, you can make the boring really exciting. And I think what I'm able to do, I will rephrase that and say, I can make policy matter and connect with people. So it's not necessarily boring, because I find it fascinating, but sometimes policy is not engaging. How do you make that engaging? And I'm able to do that. And it comes under, this social awareness, and also the older you become, the more aware you are. So some of those early questions you were asking me about my early career, I wasn't necessarily aware about isms, prejudice, sexism, misogyny, and they all happened around me. And now I'm able to articulate them a lot better and recognize them. And a lot of that social awareness, again, has come as I've become older. And I want to help younger journalists, younger people, to be able to navigate that. I don't think you can give them your experience, but you can maybe give them tools so they have their own experiences, and hopefully are able to navigate them better than I was able to navigate them.
Is there a life quote or life lesson quote that you stand by? Something that either inspires you, or something that it has been a lesson that you've learned, your own quote or someone else's quote that kind of drives you? It's like a compass out there.
Well, my mother always used to say to us when we were kids, aim high, shoot high, which for me is her way of saying that there's nothing that's too difficult that you can't achieve it. And we were told that when we were very little kids. And also I have two sisters, so we're all girls in our family. So the idea of us not being able to do things because we're female it's a non-starter with us. We all do whatever we want. We don't have jobs that are, this job is a gender-based job. This is a job that, you can't do because you're a woman. So I think having 3 daughters and having and this is not unusual in Nigerian society, having a very strong woman at the head of the family. And I would say that my mother was the head of the family, for better or for worse. that she gave us this sense of you can do whatever you set your mind to do. And unlike a lot of Nigerian families, she gave us every leeway to do whatever we wanted to do. We didn't have to be a lawyer or a doctor or an engineer. As long as we went to university, she didn't care whatever we did. We had to study, we have to be educated. So in my family, I'm a journalist. My sister is an artist and illustrator, and my other sister is a educator. She's a teacher. So none of us are doing typical Nigerian jobs. And a lot of Nigerian youngsters will tell you they are told what profession they have to follow. They are told it. They don't have a choice. And we had a complete choice. And I think that comes from my mother saying, aim high, shoot high. And as a kid, it was like, yeah, whatever that means. But I think it meant you can do whatever you want. Go for it.
Is there a message or anything that you would like us to visit before we close this amazing interview?
You get to a stage where you don't want to talk about yourself all the time. This is not my favorite kind of interview. My favorite kind of interview is talking to other people about themselves, not talking about myself. But one of the things I've done in the last few years is set up a team of mostly women, all diverse moderators who I am sharing some of the incredible opportunities that I have had over many years to be able to moderate at very high levels at the United Nations, at the World Bank, at incredible NGOs around the world. And not for it just to be about me, but to be about sharing and sharing things that I have learned, my skills and techniques coming together as a network. And it's working, and it's amazing to be able to do that. One of my team was at the United Nations last year for the very first time, standing there, emceeing. She'd sat in the seats at the UN, which is, again, very exciting. But she stood there and welcomed first ladies of African heads of state and this incredible audience. And she said, Femi, I never would have dreamed this would have been possible. Thank you. And I was so proud and so excited that I am able to not just open the door, hold it open for other people so that they are able to experience what I have experienced and to share those opportunities. And so that for me is really fun for me to do right now. And it's one of the things I'm working really hard at. And how do I do more of that? And how do I get more of those opportunities? And it's a little bit challenging because now everything is virtual, but that is, again, another opportunity. We are doing this virtually. So my idea is that Moderate the Panel is making a virtue out of virtual. Don't steal that, people. That's my idea. And it's fun, it's exciting, it's starting to build something that is just a team that I initiated with my co-founder, and we're able to do that, and it's fun and exciting, and I'm hoping it's going to be the biggest, best thing that I've ever done in my life.